Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael Collazo and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Collazo, here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, my friend?
Going great, man. I'm excited. Tomorrow I'm heading out for Ireland, and so I'm trying to get all the loose ends and everything prepared for be a week away of business. So, ready to go for that. What about you, Raphael?
No, I'm not going to Ireland, which is pretty awesome, but I'm going to be, getting stuff ready to go. We have Melanie's mother is coming into town. My fiance, her mother's coming into town next week. So similar to you, just trying to get everything ready to go before she gets here so we can show her around Kentucky and show her all the great things this state has to offer. And it's just going to be an exciting weekend change with her here locally. But speaking of just a great time and really a phenomenal conversation, we had the privilege of being able to speak with Nick Terry. He's a managing partner at Raphael Real Estate in Houston, Texas. He's just a very impressive individual. And we talked a lot about, both industrial and office property, the property types of both office and industrial real estate. He is a broker down in Houston, Texas. One of the things we kind of first started off on is how he got into commercial real estate in the first place, kind of a trend and things that we've discussed on the podcast in the past is that people a lot of times they either get in the business because their family was in the business or they just kind of dive into it outside of a different career. And Nick actually started in a different sales role, a sales engineer for, a corporate client or a corporate company, and then dove into the commercial real estate brokerage space back in 2015. And he's been operating in it ever since. So we talked a little bit about what got him interested in commercial real estate, some of the early struggles he faced in making that transition because he didn't necessarily have the real estate background before jumping into the commercial real estate business. We talked a lot about, analyzing opportunities when it comes to the space needs for both tenants and owners. When you're talking about building out office space, it can be quite expensive. So we talked about some of the cost reduction strategies for both the landlord and the tenant and some of the ways to analyze opportunities so that you can best fit particular space, depending on what you're looking for in the marketplace. And then finally, we talked a little bit about, what's some of the most, prominent trends he sees in the market, in the Houston market in particular. And then we went back and forth on different trends going on across the country. And, it was really cool it's always great to hear, the trends that you're seeing across the country and talking to people that are in a Houston or New York or, San Francisco or all these parts of the country, and seeing some of the similarities and some of the differences between what's going on locally in their market as well. So, I found the conversation extremely enlightening. I know, Jeff, you probably did as well, but I thought, what do you think about the podcast interview?
Yeah, Nick was great. Definitely a true Texan down there, from barbecue to fishing to real estate. I loved all of his insights. He actually gave me some tips through there and for being a GC. So I can't wait for everyone in the commercial real estate to listen to all the tips and tricks that he's utilized to grow his business. And from Raphael and I knowing how much he's grown it, and just in the past year, it's pretty incredible. So you definitely need to listen to this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he is an absolute hustler, and you could tell just by the conversations that we had with him. It was really an impressive individual. We're looking forward to keeping in contact with him. But along with that, as we always say, we greatly appreciate you guys' support. You guys actually leaving reviews and engaging with the podcast has resulted in a significant uptick in downloads, as we always say. So if you guys don't mind taking a few seconds right now, going to Apple Podcasts, leaving a 5-star review, it really does make a huge difference in our ability to be able to reach as a broad of audience as possible. So again, we greatly appreciate that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive around this podcast episode. Well, good morning, Nick. Great to see you.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man.
So you're tuning in from Texas, is that correct?
That's right. Houston.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. I interviewed out there when I first graduated from college for, an oil and gas position with GE. So I didn't get to see the city a lot, but it seems like that's the biggest economic driver of the city. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Huge for sure.
That's awesome. No, for sure. Well, first off, we're really honored to have you on the podcast. You have a wealth of experience in a variety of different capacities within the commercial real estate space. So we're really excited to dive in and kind of learn a little bit more about your backstory. So really, when we first interview people, we like to learn a little bit more about the person that's across the table from us. So if you don't mind kind of sharing your backstory, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, backstory is interesting. Brokerage for me was kind of a later career move, getting into commercial real estate, even though, when I graduated college, I was a sales engineer in the electrical business. But my mother-in-law and eventually wife were both in the business and the property management side. Mother-in-law was with a little company called CBRE. You guys might have heard of them. And at the time, she was running all of property management for one of the major hospital systems in the city. So it was a third-party account. I mean, she was crazy busy. Had like 75 direct reports. It was a massive account. And my wife was managing office buildings. She'd started in the West Loop, which is one of our second biggest markets, and then went downtown managing a 1 million square foot high-rise building. And so that's sort of where I found brokerage. I was very successful in a sales role in the electrical business at the manufacturer level. And I thought, man, if I'm going to do sales, I want to do commission-based sales. And if I'm going to go commission, I want to go on the largest transactions that companies do, which is typically their headcount or their facilities. Looking around at like recruiters, headhunters, my cousin, she's beautiful, very successful in the recruiting space, but she's also former head Texans cheerleader. And I was like, well, she's got some assets that I really don't have in that space. So, real estate seems to be a natural fit. So that's how I found my way into brokerage. Started with a regional firm, still have some great friendships there to this day. Was recruited away to join the tenant rep team of one of the global shops here in town with NAI Global, and I was there for just under 3 years. And then January of 2020, I struck out on my own, started my own brokerage company. Little did I know, 8 weeks later, the world was going to totally change. It was a pretty interesting time with 3 kids at home and wife at home, and we're foster parents. So we actually had a 4th kid with us, launching a commercial real estate firm during the pandemic. But we did it, super blessed, and it's been a great ride.
That's amazing, man. And it's kind of interesting to hear the backgrounds of people and where they came from and what they did prior to even jumping into commercial real estate. I feel like a lot of people who get into the industry either have a family member or some other person that they've been close to that already is in the industry and they kind of transition into it. And then there's other people who are just like, looking at it objectively and saying, this could be a very unique industry for me to be able to join in. I fall into that camp where, I was an engineer by trade and got into the commercial business roughly 2.5 years ago at this point. So it's definitely an interesting business. And, I've learned a lot through it. I'm sure you have as well. And now that you've struck out on your own, I mean, the sky's the limit. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not a lot of help wanted ads in this business, right?
No.
So even getting in, I mean, you guys, even being 2.5 years in the business, you probably get these phone calls where people are like, hey, I want to learn about getting in the business. It's a very I probably had coffee or lunch with 25 people before I left my nice cush corporate sales job and went into straight commission commercial real estate brokerage. And my discussion was a little bit different. People ask me all the time, like, oh, what would it take? It's like, for me, it was like, man, guys, I got, 2 kids at home, wife, like, is this crazy? And a lot of people are like, man, it's crazy, but like 3 to 5 years in, it'll be worth it. If you're as good at sales as you think you are. So that was helpful for me.
Absolutely.
So I know that you were saying that a lot of your family was diving in and they were particularly in the commercial realm. Why didn't you choose residential? Was that just, you didn't know anything about it and just because they were going in it, or what was the separation for that? Cause I know some people, will look at residential real estate as well before they choose commercial. I didn't know if you did the same or.
No, I didn't even, I believe in being a purist. I say that I actually co-own a residential brokerage with a buddy of mine that's under my brokerage license, but he runs it day to day. We've got 17 or 18 agents on that side. And I'm more like oversight, direction, sales training. I'm not the guy for advice on transactions. And I've never been attracted to the residential market. And I couldn't give you a great answer why. I guess, if you put a gun to my head, I would say everybody knows like 5 or 6 residential agents And so, there's a very, very saturated market. I think Houston has like almost 50,000 at this point, license holders. And I mean, we're a big city, but that's still a lot. I could probably name 25 realtors that don't work for me. And it's also, nights and weekends work, right? And so, coming from the corporate world, I wanted something that felt lateral, even if it wasn't from a structure standpoint. It's still calling on B2B sales, which is what I was doing. It's trying to get meetings with like C-level executives, which is what I was doing. So it felt more natural, and I understood the sales process better than, the realtor. I feel like as a residential agent, trying to get, there's like purchase these leads and then work these leads and then have your sphere of influence. And you do all that in commercial. It's just very different. It's a very B2C approach, which is different process.
Definitely. No, I mean, and I'll even say this, like, and I'm sure, you can maybe attest to this as well. Like in the commercial space, I mean, it's a very much more of a relationship type of business where, I've done business with some people several times over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Whereas with, in residential real estate, it seems a lot more transactional where, someone's moving away and they hire you to, list their property, and then that's pretty much it. It's not necessarily, unless you work with investors, you're not really getting to, build those long-term type of relationships with individuals that we do on the commercial front. So,
yeah, I mean, especially if you're on the tenant rep side or the agency leasing services side, you get those residual pops, right? Like that was one of the most fun things. I started as a tenant rep, and 3 years in, all of a sudden you're doing deals that you did your first year, and you're expanding them. And that, I got into business in 2015, and 16 and 17 were pretty hard years in Houston if you track the commodity pricing for oil. And so there's some clients that like, okay, we did a sublease for them and now we're doing a normal lease and now we're expanding them. And so, yeah, you get, it's not as residual as like the finance or the insurance business, but it definitely has that aspect for sure.
Definitely. No. So you mentioned, you didn't directly come into the commercial real estate space, and you essentially transitioned into it from what you were doing before. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about some of those early struggles that you faced? Obviously this was the previous position you had was B2B. So you had some familiarity as far as, being able to interact with the top brass that ultimately make the decisions when they're talking about their space needs. But, ultimately there are some differences in the process. So if you could kind of elaborate on that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, 100%. Coming in, there's some guys in the business that, their parents are in the business, or they grew up on the right side of Houston and they were members at the right, they had their first job was at a country club, caddying. And so their network was already very well developed. And then their high school buddies are taking over companies that their dads were in, or they're going into an oil and gas business and starting their own, get funded with some private equity. And so I'm not going to say they were born on third base. A lot of those guys still work really hard, but they had a very easy springboard and a good starting place to get in. And I had none of that. I mean, I grew up in a 600 square foot house on 200 acres. So single parent mother. So I had to go in and, I had to figure out pretty quickly how to get meetings, how to be effective, and how to actually be good with my transactions. Right. I didn't have the last name or the resume or the country club relationship where I could just, walk in and be like, oh, I've got 7 people in this boardroom that'll vouch for me. So that was, that was probably the biggest challenge. Is like nobody knew or cared who I was.
Absolutely. No, I can only imagine.
I had no resume, right? What deals have you done? I'm like, I've done none.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And that's a similar struggle that I faced early on as well. And one of the ways that I kind of at least mitigated that a little bit is joining and Louisville's unique dynamic. And that's one of the cool things when we get to talk to people from across the country is that each city has its own like dynamic and power structure and how, business is transacted on a broader scale. Here in Louisville, it's very much people have been here for, the families are ingrained in the community. They've been here for some over hundreds of years. And so those are the power structure of the city is operated around that lens. And so in order for you to break the seal, I guess, to break the mold, you almost have to affiliate with an organization or a group that already has a seat at the table. And so in our case, I joined a boutique brokerage in town with a family that's been around for a long period of time, and they weren't directly related to the commercial real estate business. My broker got into the business about 18 years ago, but his family has been in town for many years, and they owned a lot of restaurants around town, so their name was recognizable. So it was a lot easier to kind of have a conversation with someone and say, I'm affiliated with this group, because the name kind of rung a bell. And that helped immensely, especially early on, just to get conversations, because like you mentioned, it's really tough to get conversations with people if they don't know who the heck you are. And, a lot of these guys that you're talking to are very busy people. And so they're like, okay, who's this, schmuck, for lack of a better word, that's trying to sit down with me and talk, and just, solicit business. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
So your firm focuses on office and industrial properties, correct?
Yeah.
Is that what you guys?
Mostly.
Okay. So can you walk us through like this site selection process for someone that's leasing or buying one of those type properties?
Yep. So the reason we do office and industrial, let me back up for a sec, because it's good context.
Sure.
I was an industrial distribution major at A&M. So kind of the logistics and manufacturing piece as an engineer I get, and I'm probably an industrial guy at heart. But when I started in the business, it was in the summertime. And stacking, industrial complexes sucks in July. And so air conditioning is like high rent and air conditioning, right? So high rent and air conditioning, I was like, okay, that's a nice deal. So I tried to start as an office tenant rep, and was successful. I did some nice deals. Site selection on the office side, a lot of times it's commute time driven, especially in Houston. Our sprawl is awful. And so we, we'll look at where somebody's employee base is, where the executives are, figure out the lowest average commute time, narrow it down to some sub-markets. Obviously there's a budget piece, are you going class A, are you going class B? Are we looking sublease only? And I, coming in, I was kind of came into the business in the heat of what I call the amenities arms race. And so you've got guys that might have been in a surface parking class B building with no amenities, and all of a sudden they're looking, if they reach just a little bit further, now all of a sudden they can get, covered parking with some food and maybe a fitness center or conference center on site. So yeah, it's you're almost one part brand consultant, one part workplace consultant, and then a financial advisor in the process too, which has been interesting. A lot of times industrial, industrial used to be kind of what size box do you need? How many widgets do you need to store? What's your budget? Okay, this is what you're going to be in. But now the metrics are even more tougher, right? Coming out of the switchgear business and the commercial electrical sales, I understood electricity very well. And obviously, typically brokers are like, oh, we need 3-phase power. Okay, well, there's a whole lot of other things about electricity, right? Like, what voltage do you need? Do you need it wired delta? What are you actually running? Do you need a redundant utility feed? Do you how many amps do you actually need? A lot of people, I need 7,000 amps of power. Usually it's like the Bitcoin miner guys. They're like, we need 7,000 amps. I'm like, guys, you just can't do that, right? That you can do 2,000. You'd have to have redundant utility feeds, and now you have more power than like a high-rise office building. So, the specs, being able to really figure out what somebody needs and what it'll take to get it ready. There's no quick answer on the site selection side, especially I feel like more so for industrial now. I've got kind of a tagline, and you guys probably identify this, but I say all the easy deals have been done.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're coming in and you need a few thousand feet of move-in ready office space, and maybe you'd like to get it furnished, but you've got some time to build it out, if not, and get some furniture, and budget's not a real constraint. Like, those deals are all gone. Or like hey, we need to renew, we'll just take whatever somebody gives us. Everything just seems harder to get over the line now than it did 5-6 years ago.
Definitely no. And I guess in your market too, given the fact you're in Houston, are you seeing a trend as far as the, reconfiguration of industrial space? I know you guys have definitely a strong manufacturing presence, probably more so than we have here in Louisville. So how are you seeing that evolving, especially now that, the trend more so is through to distribution centers versus just, heavy manufacturing? Yeah.
So on most of my industrial stuff, is slanted more towards manufacturing. We're doing some light service center deals, mostly on the landlord side. But I'm not the guy out chasing the 400,000 foot dock high distribution level deal. Like there's too many guys that are really great at that specific stuff. I've got a good friend that his company has millions of feet of that product, and I've never tried to solicit his business just because that's not my deal. But something that's, I won't say that stuff's not interesting, but anything that's like manufacturing widgets, or we need to, crane load 15,000 pound valves that are, 25 feet high, and we need to get a door for that. That sort of stuff's kind of interesting. And that's where I've kind of fallen on most of my industrial deals. And that stuff isn't being reconfigured as much.
Yeah.
That stuff is what it is right now. Kind of our hottest thing, magic buzzword for me on all of our listings is like lay down yard. Everybody wants outside storage.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
nice.
I couldn't agree more. We actually had a listing here. It's a smaller property, but that's one of the biggest hurdles for that particular property is that it just doesn't have a lot of, land to be able to store material on. And so, people are looking at the space. They're saying they love the space, but not enough land to be able to put whatever, raw materials or product they need to be able to, produce whatever their widget is, like you said. So, that's part of the functional obsolescence piece. I'm sure that you were talking about a little bit earlier is just, getting a feel for what the needs of the business are, and then ultimately deciding based on what's available within that property, whether or not it's going to fulfill what they're trying to do or trying to accomplish.
Yep. And you guys are probably seeing this too. The biggest thing for me, either on the tenant or the landlord side, everybody wants their stuff to be move-in ready. Nobody has a stomach for construction right now. Too many change orders, too much, I don't know how many months of just insane inflation have been strung together at this point. But it's a lot. And so, on the ownership side, I'm telling my owners like, man, spend the money and build the space out. Nice. Make it move-in ready. It will lease up. I assure you. Like in under a month. There's just all the deals that I'm competing in and getting in these bake-offs have all been going back through like November in what used to be a pretty soft-ish office market. It's all for move-in ready furnished space. And so you're going from, big concession packages all of a sudden to like, you have until 5 o'clock to sign this deal or it's going away.
It's crazy, man. No,
I've seen that a lot around here. I'm a commercial GC here in Louisville, and a lot of landlords have called and they're wanting to retrofit the space and just add
Build
amenities. And I mean, and they did want it like as soon as someone walks through their door, like, hey, this is it, So they're definitely doing a lot of redevelopment and adding amenities around here. So
yeah. And there's enough sample size now. We're trying to convince owners to spend the money. I feel like it's a little bit easier. One of my good friends and fishing buddies is an agency leasing guy with JLL, and he said something genius years ago. He said, "Man, on the office agency leasing side, we're not marketing properties as much as we are spaces." Yeah. He's like, tenants might select a building and be okay being anywhere in the building, but my vacancies in the stack are all specific spaces, and each of those spaces has different things that's good and or bad about it. Like the views might be stellar here. Maybe you get a lot of glass in this one, you get 2 corners in this building, whatever it is, each space has something specific. And so being able to like build those spaces to showcase those positives, I think is just huge.
That's awesome. And that kind of leads me to my next topic, which I wanted to kind of talk about, was that how do you, I guess, work with your clients to assess those build out requirements? Because like you said, I mean, it's maybe gotten, like you said, a little bit easier to be able to convince them, but what are some of the key points that you touch on? And maybe you can reference maybe some of the data that you've been seeing in the marketplace to kind of help them make that decision.
Like clients on the ownership side, like landlords?
On the ownership side. Yeah.
How do you price some improvement dollars out speculatively?
Mm-hmm.
So you look at lease up time. It's probably the biggest metric. And there's a pretty big argument of it's going to be cheaper now. And Jeff, you'll resonate with this. It's going to be cheaper to build it now than next year.
Yeah.
It used to be like, oh, if you're doing a full floor, then maybe you wait. But I mean, I just signed a deal 2 months ago that was basically a spec suite. It was with Parkway Properties. I put a client in 15,000 feet. It was about 2/3 of the floor plate. And that it was like their spec suite program where they had the plans and permits in place. They built out the lobby and a couple of the first few offices, and you kind of got like a taste of what the space would be. And then the rest of it was just like it wasn't shell. There was lights in, there wasn't a grid in, the AC, like the VAV boxes were in place, and that was about it. And so and people like actually touring shell office space, 300 feet up in the air, because it's pretty cool. It's wide open, it feels really big.
Yeah.
But the first place, you still got the vibe that they had done, and the permits were in hand, which in Houston, I don't want to get political, but some cities have shut down a lot faster than some of the surrounding state governments, and so our permit office is just super backed up. And so having those permits in hand would really differentiate it. Where all of a sudden you can do a 15,000 foot deal in 6 to 8 weeks. They benefited from those dollars that were spent up front, and they got that deal. And there was another. I mean, I've got some good buddies that are leasing guys in house for landlords around that building, and they didn't get a look because it wouldn't have been ready. Our guys didn't have 3 to 4 months to wait. So I think you push, trying to convince owners, you push the timing, and there's a lot fewer concessions.
Oh yeah.
I already on the tenant rep side, I'll tell my tenants, like, if we're looking at a move-in ready space, especially if it's furnished, I'm like, guys, the deal's going to be the deal. There's not going to be, maybe your attorney can button up a few things here or there. But the economics are probably going to be pretty firm if you want this move-in ready space. Now, if you want to do the old school, we'll get the TI allowance and then we'll have 3 contractors go through, and then we'll have, the architect test fit it and all that sort of stuff. If you want to do all that stuff, you might be able to save a couple bucks. But by the time you get construction going, it may cost you even more. And this is already done.
Yeah. No,
That's
you pay for the convenience of being able to move in and get your operations up and running. And, and to your point, pertaining to, the landscape, the market landscape, we had a gentleman that we interviewed from Dallas, actually, who is doing similar things in that particular market. Gross. I know, right? The healthy competition. I know, the healthy competition between Houston and Dallas. That's awesome. No, but he was telling me, like, in the situation where you're kind of advising, landlords, and, maybe they had a space that was fit out for 40,000 square foot office tenant. And then, given the dynamics or the demographics of that particular area, there may not be that many potential tenants that could fit that space. So why would you wait 3 years to eventually, fill up that space? Whereas, putting some infrastructure dollars in place to be able to, break up the space so that it can attract a different type of tenant is also going to save you a lot of time of just lost costs or lost revenue of just letting the building sit there until something comes along too. So.
And well, it's not just the office side either. We had a client, it was actually a property, a portfolio I was going to buy last year, and I had a friend of a friend in the software business that needed to acquire a bunch of stuff for the end of the year. So we assigned him our interest in the contract, but he kept us on to run the deal from a management and leasing perspective. And we're doing the same thing there. The owner was like, what was your program going to be here? And I was like, man, we're just going to go suite by suite, remodel each single one. Here's the spec suite program. We're going to do nice modern finishes, and everything's going to be move-in ready. And then, we can go from bottom of market rents to top of market rents. And you do that over the course of 18 months and you'll double the value of the property. And we're able to quantify what you start looking at the value of a lease. As a CCIM, I'm kind of a numbers geek, but you look at, like, okay, here's the increase in rental rate, right? We put just that increase of rental rate on a cap rate. And then you can figure out the ROI on that construction. It's kind of a made up metric, but if you say, hey, the construction here, you'll spend $120,000 to get an increase of value of $400 over the life of that lease, right? So the property value goes up $400K. It's a no brainer. That's a lever you'd pull it, triple your money. You do that. I'd pull that lever as many times as I could. So, but you have to be able to prove it up, and you have to be able to execute then, right? You tell your owner you're going to do it, then you have a vacant spec suite going. Like, you can expect to get fired from that project pretty soon.
Absolutely.
You were talking about numbers. Are there any other, like, cost reduction strategies that you normally recommend or you utilize with your clients, particularly like in occupancy, just getting your clients actually into the office space and or industrial space? Or can you
reduce some costs for the tenant or for the owner?
Let's go with the tenant. Let's go with that.
So on the tenant side, I mean, if you're a single tenant property, or even a majority of a project, one of the things I push for is to obligate the owner to protest the property taxes every year.
That's a good one.
Really good OpEx provisions. I mean, I've seen some interesting stuff pass through to tenants before. One of the biggest ways to control costs, when my wife's neighboring building, it was in the project, but the anchor tenant in that building downtown, every other year it was guaranteed they were going to audit the OpEx. They just knew it was coming. It was a third-party firm, and it was just scheduled. So the property managers, the property accountants, everybody kind of knew it was coming. And you look at really big company with some best practices, like that's a good thing that almost a tenant of any size can take. And it's also, by the way, for some of you guys that are newer in the business and know the CRE Academy, like that's a great touch point that isn't as salesy as some of the others. January through April, my prospecting scripts when I was picking up new business was like, hey, you're about to get an operating expense reconciliation from your owners. Send those to me. Just have a second set of eyes to look at them. We'll see them from the whole city. We'll be able to compare, and I can see if anything jumps out. Typically we'll find one or two things that aren't in line with your lease. I don't know who negotiated your lease, but we know the things that we try and exclude and push and fight for. And so we'll be able to find any kind of overages or some cost overruns that we can, then you're adding value ahead of that next lease renewal or expansion or whatever.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Oh yeah, those are some great insights pertaining to that. And ultimately, like you said, I mean, especially if you're operating in the office environment, have you seen any effects as far as, I guess the gross lease piece? So, a lot of those expenses fall back on the landlord, or in your market, is it more that's more passed through to the tenant?
So, I mean, we're either like a full service with a base year or triple net. Most of the market's gone triple net. And I mean, I just like a triple net lease for either side of the transaction. As a tenants don't like it because I feel like they're paying for more. But once you explain to them like the concept of a base year and that they're paying for it anyway, like guys, all a triple net lease does is prevent the gross lease from being a profit center. If the CAM goes down, if the taxes go down, you don't get it. You don't get the reduction. You just go back to your original. The expenses didn't increase. It's still X. Yeah.
No, for sure. No, and that's just more of a question pertaining to your guys' market, because in our market it's similar. A lot of our proper product here in Louisville is gross. There are some buildings that are triple net, but for the most part, it's either full service gross or modified gross, where the tenant's responsible for like electric. But other than that, I mean, they're typically it's the landlord's responsibility in our market. So it's very interesting. Go ahead.
Usually you're getting at least in the lease accounting stuff that came out years ago. Most of them, you're seeing most tenants kind of breaking it out in the OPEX portion anyway. Even if it's a gross rent structure, they're still getting those OPEX numbers to break out the leasehold accounting interest correctly.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and then you referenced the base year. I mean, that's kind of recouping some of those expenses as well. Yeah, that's awesome. So what are some of the most prominent trends you see in your marketplace, and how can some of the owners of these properties capitalize on them? We kind of mentioned, the growing trend of distribution centers across the nation. Ultimately, and what you focus on is more on the manufacturing side. But maybe there's some trends on the manufacturing front that you're seeing, and then obviously on the office side, what are some of the things you're seeing as well?
Yeah, the demand for move-in ready turnkey space, biggest trend across all product types that I'm seeing. And it's the most significant, like, if somebody says, hey, what do you think about this property? I'm going to look and see like, okay, this, like, you got to update it, man. It looks terrible. And that's your first at bat. I look at our company almost as like a digital market, especially on the landlord side. We're a digital marketing company that happens to be focused on commercial real estate, right? Because that's where all the leads are coming from. I mean, we still do hot knocking and we still call, but once you get somebody's attention on a property, then what? What's your marketing material look like? And so showcasing move-in ready, really nice furnished spaces is like the number one thing. Locating, we're still seeing, especially post-pandemic, just the sprawl of Houston getting even worse. You're now seeing like developments for office and office warehouse product that's, 90 to 100 minutes from downtown Houston. Following, in the path of growth, right? We have just massive suburban master plan communities going way, way, way out. Areas that used to be rice fields are now, getting mud districts put in, and massive, we've got our third loop now called the Grand Parkway going around Houston. So the sprawl and the interconnectivity is even bigger. So you're seeing those developments popping up everywhere.
Nice. Oh, definitely. Most certainly. Yeah, no. And you kind of mentioned a little bit on the digital front. I'd love you to elaborate a little bit on that, because you do have a very strong presence on digital platforms, particularly LinkedIn. Yep. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that, I think that'd be pretty helpful, because we definitely, obviously, and I'm of the mindset of this is that, the way that we transact real estate has been the same for many, many, many years. And ultimately it's going to maintain the same vein, in my opinion. But augmenting it with digital technology is really just going to be game changing for the industry long term. And as more and more people adopt this technology, as far as, their decision making process, it's only going to, accelerate the growth in that space. So if you could kind of elaborate, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So there's kind of two parts that we really kind of think differentiate us. And I use this in pitches too. I picked up it was a disposition requirement for a nonprofit. I'm going to answer your question with a story. I like telling
That's
stories.
great. No, I love it. Yeah.
So it was, roughly a $3 million transaction. There was some distress that, they were in there. This nonprofit bought the building thinking they would offset their occupancy cost. And then they had to do like $1 million CapEx project on the elevators, like within 2 months. Elevators were starting to like cave into the building. Massive. I mean, it's a terrible deal. And so we had like all the things of like, okay, we need to sell it quickly, but it's like not in great shape. They made the elevators nice. Like, man, how do we do this? And so they had it listed for like a year and a half with another brokerage. And, we get the question like, okay, what makes you guys different? Like, you're going to come in here, new company, like, why should we go with you? And I said, let me answer your question with a story. I'm going to send you an email with a flyer for one of my properties. And they said, okay, great. So I send them an email. They pull it up. They're looking at the flyer and they're like, oh, this looks amazing. I said, great. It's beautiful, right? We hire professionals for everything. Professionals build our templates, all of our photos, all of our videos. Like, we just don't scrimp on that stuff. Because if it's got my brand, I want it to look amazing. I know too many guys at big firms that take pictures on their iPhones for their listings. I just refuse to do that. It's just too easy to have excellence in your marketing material. But I'm going to go one step further. And I said, okay, Mrs. President, you spent 14 seconds looking at page 3 of that flyer. You spent 17 seconds looking at page 4. You spent, 2 seconds looking at the state required IABS form that we have to send you. She's like, how did you know that? And I was like, oh, and by the way, you right now that I'm assuming that you've had it hovering over the floor plan because you're at like 1 minute and 2 seconds on that. She's like, what in the world? I was like, everything we do is tracked. And because it's tracked, it's also actionable. So now I can set triggers where you open that flyer twice in a day, it'll schedule a phone call with me or my team. If you forward that on and somebody else pulls it up, I'm going to know. And I can find what's interesting in those flyers, and then I can tailor the rest of our marketing material to make it even better. And then I can do that at scale because of the systems we've brought on and the technology partners we have where, much like, I don't know if you guys have hobbies. I'm sure you've probably bought something related to your hobby on Instagram. For me, it's fishing, right? Like I made the mistake of like buying these really nice fishing shirts one time. And now all of a sudden, like I get hammered with stuff on Instagram through Instagram cards. There's another one. There's a golf shirt company called Rowback, super comfortable shirts. Right. So I looked at one of their things and said, this is a really cool shirt. And the next thing, like I'm in this follow-up sequence on emails and I bought a shirt and referral partners. Like I'm in their system, right? I'm in their program and I'm on some marketing sequence. And so we've tried to bring some of that to commercial real estate when nobody else is doing it. I say nobody else. I could name like a handful of people that operate like we do. And so that's been, of course we won the pitch, right? Like nobody else can do that. Even guys at big firms that have all these proprietary in-house tools, if you don't know how to use them and you don't know how to make your data actionable, it's just not worth it.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, Nick. No, go ahead.
I was going to say that keeps things from going through the cracks. Otherwise, especially brokers, we like to think, oh, we're the best, or we have the best follow-up process, or our team does so many deals. But it really resonates with an owner when you sit down and say, we don't trust ourselves as individuals to not let things fall through the cracks. So here's how we prevent that. No lead is going to slip through a crack. It's going to go in an automated follow-up sequence. So we're going to know, and we're going to keep hounding somebody until they tell us to leave them alone. If you were inquiring one of my properties, either me or somebody on my team, we'll mark you in and put you in a follow-up sequence. That's like 2 to 3 touches per week initially. And it starts off with more intensity and then kind of cools over time, but we never really let go of you until you tell us to.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, these technologies are tools, but unless you are committed and deliberate about how you implement them in your marketing and follow-up process, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could have the most sophisticated tools in the world. I mean, I went to a technology conference in New York City, the CRE Tech conference last year.
Yeah.
And you see some pretty impressive technologies down there, and it's just amazing what's coming down the pike. But similar to that, they're tools. So I mean, JLL or CBRE or some of these larger brokerages are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in these technologies, but if they're not being utilized accordingly for their intended purpose, I mean, there's no real benefit to the ultimate, person who is the client. So it's amazing what you guys have been able to do. And I'm sure you take time out of your day too, to think about different ways you can implement new technologies and, modify things over time to really streamline the process.
Yeah. Yeah. I try and blow up our processes every 2 to 3 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, you're talking about LinkedIn. If you've noticed, like I haven't been as active on LinkedIn as I probably was like 4 or 5 years ago. I used to post videos regularly because the signal to noise ratio is terrible now. It used to be, man, if you had LinkedIn and a Zoom info account and you could layer the two on top of each other, you could do anything, right? I would close a deal, add my client contact, CEO, CFO, president. Then I would skim all their contacts to see who in their circle I should reach out to and tell about the deal we just did with their buddy. But now I probably get 5 to 10, and obviously principal level, owner title in your LinkedIn bio gets you a lot of this stuff, but I get 5 to 10 unsolicited, like automated copy paste messages in my LinkedIn. And it's, people figured it out and it's no longer like blue water. LinkedIn used to be great. I picked up business all the time on LinkedIn, and now it's guys that are outsourcing it to virtual assistants in India or the Philippines or wherever. And it's just these like canned spammy messages, and it's awful. I would share my screen to show you my LinkedIn inbox just to show you how awful it is. But like, I don't even like getting on there now just because of all the garbage. And I've still got some good friends. I'm re-engaging and trying to post on stuff.
No,
so we moved out there. There's other things. There's always something else that you need to blow up.
Definitely no, and I could definitely see that being the case. I mean, I'm definitely more active on LinkedIn as of late, and I've definitely seen those type of spammy messages, and I think LinkedIn, the value proposition that it offers, and I'm sure it's changed over time, is more so just getting out there and building a brand, and obviously since you're operating primarily in the Houston market, do you operate anywhere outside of where you're currently located, or is it primarily?
Yeah, we do just because I'm a tenant rep guy at heart, so the corporate services side, we did a office lease renewal in downtown Denver last year. We did a ground lease in Florida. We did a small office warehouse lease in Hotlanta, Georgia. Yeah, we've done a few things here and there.
That's awesome. No, for sure. And in that case, for sure, leveraging those relationships that you built on the platform can be of value as well. But
that's right.
Cool, man. Well, first off, Nick, we just want to thank you for your time. I know you're super busy in your market, and obviously you shared a lot of great insights today. Usually near the end of the podcast, what we like to do is we like to ask a few questions. One being Jeff, myself, and our audience a lot of us are voracious readers. We love to consume different types of content pertaining to a variety of different topics. And so one of the questions we like to ask is, what was one of the most impactful books you've ever read? It doesn't have to be real estate related. It can be anything.
100%. So Fanatical Prospecting, Jeb Blunt. I feel like if you're in commercial real estate, you probably know that name. Everything he writes is amazing. I've emailed and corresponded with him directly. He's very responsive. That was the game changer for me. Just, it really gave me a good context to understand cold outreach over the phone and how that works. And he's an omni-channel guy, right? So he's not like just the phone, but I feel like the phone's so easily neglected. It was huge.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. And I'll even admit to that at times where, you getting it into a rhythm, because you get into a point where, you start the prospecting cycle, you start to get busy, and it's very easy to kind of fall out of the practice of doing that. Whereas, with Jeb Blunt, like you mentioned, his systems that he preaches are pretty impactful. So,
yeah. And what I'm in the middle of, you guys probably heard of it, the 75 hard challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm in the middle of one of those with some neighbors and buddies. And this is just kind of true in life. It's not a specific book, but the consistency of effort over time. That's like how you accomplish everything, right? You want to get in shape. If you want to, improve yourself in any sort of way, if you want to build a good sales pipeline, like getting in there and doing something every single day and never taking your foot off the gas is the way to do it.
Definitely. No, I couldn't agree more. And in particular in sales too, because it's a brutal business, and starting out, I don't know. I don't come from a sales background. So, when I first got into the business, I felt like I was just fumbling around a lot.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
getting into a rhythm, has helped me as far as just interacting with clients and, ultimately getting to the finish line, is what we are. We're commissioned salespeople. So, we're finding those early prospecting skills are invaluable for sure.
Well, in the first, however many thousands of touches you're going to do are going to be pretty terrible. I mean, I just shudder and think back of like some of the first calls and LinkedIn messages and whatever emails I sent. But you got to get through those to get to the other side. So like a buddy of mine, I'm not sure what he's doing now, but he runs a brokerage, it's probably 25 people. And when you start, if you're in the tenant rep business, there's tons of lists or whatever to call, but your cadence is like 500 calls a week when you start. And they're going to be awful. It's going to be like, hello, sir, I'd like to talk to you about your real estate, right? But you got to get through those to get to the, hey, good afternoon. By way of introduction, I just renewed your neighbor's office lease, and we got $500,000 in free rent. Not sure when your lease is up, but I'd love to chat with you, at your convenience. You got to get through the crappy ones to get to all of a sudden the one that like people are going to take you up on and want to meet with you. And so having a system to get those out of the way first is great. And then it tapers down, right? And then it's like 400, then 300. And then I think their baseline is like 100 calls a week.
That's amazing. That's great.
Say,
Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that we appreciate you coming on, Nick. You definitely gave us a lot of value and stuff. And one thing that we always ask our guests is we have a CRE treasure chest, which is a repository of things that people give us a PDF or a case study. And some people even do like little videos and stuff like that. And our ask is what are you willing to contribute to that?
Yeah. So I'm going to put together a list of reasons to reach out. I always felt like it was super hard to like figure out why somebody would want to talk to me about their real estate. And so I just remember, 2015, 2016, listening to all the CRE, and there's fewer than CRE related podcasts, listening to interviews like this is kind of interesting, like 6, 7 years, 8 years later, being on the other side of one now. But those are things I was always interested in, is like how those people did business development. Cause I feel like everyone's like always looking for deals. So that's what we're going to put together. It's just reasons, the kind of reasons to call somebody about your business.
Nice. We appreciate that. That would be awesome.
Oh yeah, no, and I'll probably review it too, because there's definitely some times where I'm sitting there in front of the computer, I'm like, I want to reach out to this person, but I don't really know how to approach it. So I'm definitely going to be taking advantage of that as well. So thank you for contributing that, Nick. Really.
Well, you know what too? Also, like there's some beauty in that candor. There, I had a guy called last year. It was a data provider, like a skip tracing company. Guy called me. I was driving down the road. I don't even know how he got my number, but as a sales guy, I could probably figure it out. And he called my personal cell, which that number is not just out there. He said, "Man, I'll be honest. I don't have some canned script or whatever. I just saw your profile, and I've worked with people like you that have seen a benefit from our product. I know it sounds like I caught you driving down the road, but I'd love to chat some more about what we're seeing." I said, "Man, you got 15 minutes before I get to my next stop." And I was a little bit standoffish at first, but I was like, super easy. You just pay per every search you do. It's not like a monthly subscription. It looks like you just launched your company 6 months ago. So I know monthly subscriptions probably suck. And like just then I had just been hit with a co-star increase. So it's pretty timely, pretty empathetic of like, yeah, okay, let's keep your burn rate a little bit lower. But it was great. Ended up signing on with him. And I was like, man, okay, that was a cold call that worked. Like, what did I like about that? And I was like, he was just honest. He's like, I don't have some canned introductory speech of a reason that you should talk to me, other than I just have helped people that have, I've worked with people that are in your shoes before. But when you say that, I actually mean it. Like for, Jeff, if I was in your business I'm assuming you try and do business development, right? In the commercial construction space. Yeah. Like that's a pain point for everybody. And like, I've got contractors that we're trying to manage on the asset services side. And we're like, okay, guys, here's the draw schedule that I want from you and what's going to be complete. And they still I've got guys that are like, just, hey, here's an invoice for a draw and what it's going to. I was like, no, like give me the milestones, right? Like I can't go to an owner and be like, hey, let's pay this guy again. There's just so many reasons. There's so many ways that things could be improved. And that's, as a sales guy, what you're trying to sell is like an improved something, some benefit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And thanks again for sharing that insight and utilizing a story, like you said earlier, because I think anytime you learn something, anytime I've learned something that's profound, it's always been through, a story or some example to reference on, because now it becomes a lot more relatable. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, no,
guys.
well, Nick, we greatly appreciate your time. Like I said before, if people want to learn a little bit more about you, wanted to reach out to you to do some business together, or, learn more about, what you do on a day-to-day basis, how can they do that?
Yeah. So the day-to-day basis one, it's not a ton of real estate content. It's a lot of fishing, family, and Texas barbecue, but I'm on Instagram, some guy in HTX. If you're going to talk shop, email me, nick@riflecre.com. And then that's also our website domain is riflecre.com. So you can check out our listings, some of what we're doing. The website's about due to be nuked and rebuilt. We just changed hosting platforms to get a faster loading speed, but should be some interesting stuff coming.
That's awesome. No, so and we'll go ahead.
Add me on LinkedIn for sure.
Oh, for sure. And what we're going to go ahead and do as well is we typically share all that information below. So if you guys are watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the description below. And if you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, it'll be in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Just go to the description below as well. So again, Nick, we greatly appreciate your time. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, we would greatly appreciate if you can like and subscribe to this channel. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and ensures more and more people can hear this message. If you guys are listening to this in an Apple Podcast format or Spotify or whatever other medium you're listening to, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. It's been amazing to see the growth we've experienced in the podcast as a result of you guys leaving a 5-star review. So continue to do so, and we greatly appreciate it. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.